Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to do something pretty fascinating. We're taking a single, rapid-fire news segment featuring two Australian politicians, Senator Matt Canavan and MP Monique Ryan, and we're going to break down their colliding realities. It is honestly a perfect case study in how two opposing sides can look at the exact same set of facts, and yet somehow build completely different narratives.
Okay, so here's a quick look at our agenda for today. First, we'll look at the overarching political divide. Second, repatriating the ISIS brides. Third, the capital gains tax debate. Fourth, the cost of climate action. And finally, weighing the priorities. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The political divide. So in just a few minutes of live television, Senator Canavan and MP Ryan had to rapid-fire their stances on borders, the economy, and climate change. And what's wild here is that neither side is denying the core events that are happening in the world. They agree on the facts, but they are absolutely warring over what those events mean for the country. It's like a giant puzzle where they have the exact same pieces, but are trying to build two entirely different pictures. Let's see exactly how they frame it.
Section 2. Repatriating the ISIS brides.
Let's set the table with the baseline facts straight from the source. 6 returnees arrived in Sydney and Melbourne under Australian Federal Police protection. Upon arrival, they were placed in government-funded hotel stays. Now, it wasn't just a blanket welcome. At least one individual was actively excluded from returning to the country, and some of the returnees were actually arrested the moment they hit the airport. So, those are the raw facts. Now let's look at the interpretation.
Look at how Senator Canavan uses these exact facts to build his case. He points to a supposed lack of guts, framing the entire operation as clear evidence of a chaotic, totally hands-off approach to border security by the current government. In his view, the Australian government effectively outsourced its border control to Syria. He looks at those arrests and exclusions we just talked about and says, well, that highlights the unknown risks. It leads straight to his conclusion that the government simply isn't doing its job to protect the homeland.
On the flip side, looking at the exact same arrival, MP Monique Ryan highlights a completely different angle. She focuses squarely on the humanitarian aspect. She points out that these returns include vulnerable children who literally grew up in Syrian camps. She argues that they need gentle treatment, right? Not an aggressive media scrum. And she counters that outsourcing argument head-on, noting that this repatriation was actually requested by the U.S. administration and that allies like Canada and France are doing the exact same thing.
This right here is where you see just how wild politics could be. The exact same data points are used as ammunition by both sides. Is it a massive failure of sovereign border control, as Canavan argues? Or is it a carefully monitored international obligation coordinated with global allies, like Ryan suggests? Ryan points to the arrests as proof that the government is closely monitoring the situation, while Canavan points to those exact same arrests as proof of an unacceptable domestic risk. Same facts, entirely different realities.
Moving right along to Section 3, the capital gains tax debate.
The news segment rapidly pivots to proposed changes to the capital gains tax, or CGT. Now, look at the timeline here, because this is crucial. MP Ryan notes that the small business CGT threshold hasn't been raised since 2007. It's been a long time. Meanwhile, the latest federal budget was just handed down less than 2 weeks prior to this debate, and the actual legislation for these tax changes was scheduled to be presented to Parliament the very next day.
The framing of this timeline is so fascinating. Senator Canavan looks at that frantic 2-week window between the budget and the legislation combined with the government tweaks and calls it a shambolic, complete and utter mess. To him, it's rushed lawmaking with zero business feedback. MP Ryan, however, looks back to that 2007 date. Small businesses have been desperately wanting these thresholds raised for over a decade. So she views the recent tweaks not as a mess at all, but as active, necessary consultation to finally fix a totally stagnant issue.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, the cost of climate action.
$150 million. This is the figure Senator Canavan absolutely anchors his argument on. It's the taxpayer money spent on Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen's side role at a UN climate conference. And to really drive it home, he pairs this massive number with the claim that 100 bureaucrats are working on it, alongside almost $500,000 already spent just on travel.
And to make that bureaucratic spending really hit home, Canavan immediately connects it to the everyday consumer. Power prices have gone up $500 for the average family since the current government took power. By placing those millions in government spending right next to a $500 hit to family power bills, well, he crafts a very specific, powerful narrative, doesn't he? It paints a picture of a government wasting money on international events while everyday citizens suffer immediate financial pain. But then,
MP Ryan completely flips the script by dropping her own number, $8.7 billion. Citing the Climate Change Authority, she points out that this is the projected cost to Australia by the years 2030 to 2050 if the country fails to act on climate change. She shifts the lens entirely away from the immediate cost of a single conference directly to the catastrophic future cost of doing nothing.
And honestly, this is the essence of the climate debate in a nutshell. Canavan focuses on immediate bureaucratic waste and rising current living costs, while Ryan focuses on preventing massive future economic damage. And just to counter Canavan's outrage over the UN conferencing spending, Ryan points out that previous conservative governments also spent heavily on international summits. She specifically cites former Prime Minister Tony Abbott spending $400 million on the G20 summit back in 2014. It is your classic battle of short-term cost versus long-term investment.
Which brings us to our final part today. Section 5. Weighing the priorities. When we take a step back and look at all three of these debates together, a really striking pattern emerges. Senator Canavan's framework consistently prioritizes immediate, tangible security and strict process certainty. He wants tight borders, slow and predictable tax legislation, and minimal immediate bureaucratic costs. MP Monique Ryan's framework, however, consistently prioritizes long-term obligations and adaptability. She emphasizes humanitarian duties, the need to update outdated tax codes through active consultation, and spending money right now to mitigate massive future financial risks down the road.
By dissecting just this single news segment, we've seen exactly how facts are woven into much larger worldviews. So we want to leave you with this question to ponder today. As a citizen, when you evaluate the success or failure of a policy, how do you weigh immediate costs and strict security against long-term humanitarian obligations and future economic risks? Which of these priorities carries more weight when you look at the future of the country? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. We really hope it gave you a clearer lens to view the daily political debate. Catch you next time.